Hi everyone, welcome to panel number 2, introducing embodied research in creative practice. As Ray said, I'm Linda Luke. Really have the pleasure of hosting today's panel with these lovely, beautiful artists and with everyone here, so thank you. So I think what I'll do first is just introduce each of the artists and then we'll go for a little talk about embodied practice and then we'll have a conversation with the artists here and then go from there. Okay. So I just want to introduce Liz Glazebrook, and Liz hails from Mildura, the Millewa Mallee region, and is a long-time visual artist who is passionate about capturing the ever-changing ethereal colours of the Millewa Mallee landscape. And anyone knows that, it's so beautiful out there. And she's drawn to protecting the environment and its health, and particularly to the pink salt lakes. And if you haven't been downstairs, you know, it's you would have, you know, the beautiful paintings and installation downstairs of the pink salt lakes there, just to give a bit of context. And then we have Kris Tito. Wonderful. Kris grew up in Mildura, has lived many years in the rich and diverse culture that makes up Western Sydney, and has now returned to the Murray, living in Echuca, Yorta Yorta country. Yay! As an artist, Kris investigates place, time and memory for embodied movement, performance and visual practices, exploring environmental and familial connections to the Milbarka Murray-Darling rivers. Kris aims to share how the environments that we inhabit intimately inform who we are or who we are becoming. And Sandra Collins. Yeah, Sandra is an artist born on Wiradjuri country, and Sandra's going to help me say Bungamabra.
Bungambarawatha.
Thank you. Bungambarawatha.
Bungambarawatha.
She has to teach me. Bungambarawatha. Aubrey. Her creative journey is deeply grounded in the life-sustaining relationships she shares with country and her elder mama girl, whose wisdom continues to guide her throughout life. Through Sandra's performance practice and art making, she seeks to inspire and ignite traditional spiritual wisdoms, upholding values of respect, grace and humility. And last but not least is Kirsten Wehner, and Kirsten is an artist, curator and writer who lives on Ngunnawal country. Ngunnawal. I still keep saying Ngunnawal country, also known as Canberra. Her practice explores people's relationships with the more than human world, often taking the form of participatory experiences as well as works in drawing, painting, sculpture and installation that seek to generate cross-species empathy and care. Kirsten's current research centres on waterways as sites of cultural ecological embodiment, holders of story and generators of imagined futures. And Kirsten is currently the James O. Fairfax Senior Fellow in Cultural Environment at the National Museum of Australia. Yeah.
It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Apologies.
So, and I'm Linda, as I've said already. Sorry, I get a bit nervous doing these things. I was invited by wonderful Ray to co-facilitate the practical lab component of Borders, which you well and truly know and have heard by now. And of course, Peter Fraser is partner in crime in this process, and it's been an amazing process working with Peter and with Ray, and conversations with Ray, and then like really going hours of planning, understanding, conversation. I've learnt so much from Peter, to understand, to facilitate the labs with multidisciplinary artists, different than working a lab with performers, for example, or dancers. So that's just, I just really want to acknowledge that, because it's been an amazing journey, to also a privilege to have that for 3 years, and to repeat and deepen has been a really fantastic thing. Peter and I are both performers and dancers. We're performance makers and dancers. Much of our core practice, not all, but we're very informed by and trained in this body weather process, which Peter explained a little bit about, and I'll just reiterate, is a methodology originally developed by the world-renowned Japanese choreographer dancer Min Tanaka. And Tanaka drew, in the 80s and 90s, he drew together national and international performers and artists to come and live with him in Japan. And there they started all of this sort of thing, questioning, developing, working like crazy on the floor, developing athletic bodies to dance, amazing dancers. And they formed a company called Maijuku. And that's the foundation of this body weather work, where it's now proliferated out across the world with those performers that were originally, of which Frank Vanderven is one of those performers, and has come across, and we've been, and then in each country, it's been developing in different ways, as it should, as times go by and we're responding to current contemporary concerns. So, for me, in my experience of body wear, it's not so interested in form or representation, it's more interested in being, and being moved by the environment outside the borders of who and what I think I am. Also outside the borders of what my mind tells me, my imagination or my cognitive ability. I think you could say body weather aims to generate work and ideas that's more in the realm of the non-human, and this encompasses all manner of what exists in the body that makes up our world. That's the world body. It's trees, plants, rock, tectonic plates, and etc., atoms and cells, and also the ineffable, such as the atmosphere of the silent shape-shifting of clouds, for example, or the intense energy of fire. So when you think about fire and the energy and to generate something like that. So, there's a lot in the world to kind of contemplate there. It's so even though body weather is traditionally, or is a dance and performance making practice, however, Ray, Peter, and I were interested in how body weather might work with and inspire artists of other disciplines to immerse themselves in the landscape, opening up all their senses, muscles and bones, to directly experience the environs around the Murray River, and to attempt to embody something that is non-human. So what do I mean? And this came up in our discussion when we were discussing this panel, is what do we mean by embodied? And that can mean many things, and there's lots of literature out there. But just for today's sake, and when I contemplated that and chatted with these guys, as a dance maker and performer, I've always been interested in how we're moved to express by outside forces, particularly of the non-human kind, such as deeply observing how a blade of grass moves in the breeze. So first up, studying the body of that little length of blade of grass. Just keep it simple in your mind. How is it embedded in the earth? How sturdy is it? How flexible? How does it move? How is it moved by a breeze? A breeze that might be an air current that is straight and forceful, or the air current is circular, or perhaps cross currents of air that impact this little grass body. And then I try to imagine being that blade of grass. What is it that the blade of grass, how does the blade of grass experience the world? What's its world? What is its experience? Without anthropomologising it. Just open question. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite everyone to maybe stand up for a moment. It's going to be hard with a microphone. And just roll our shoulders for a moment, because I thought if we're going to talk about what is embodied practice, well, maybe we should do it. Because then it's slightly one little less layer of cognition, yeah? Let's just roll our hips, yeah? And our backs, think about your back space and warming through the back and the spine, and maybe the neck a little bit, and maybe just a little bit the legs, shake them out. Because we do a lot of sitting in panels, and maybe just a little bit of, you know, tap through the feet, the hips wiggle to the side, and stretch your arms up. Keep going through the feet and then the other arm. Maybe both arms, but I'm not doing that. You do it. Cool. And so I just wanted you to just take a moment, and maybe if you're comfortable to do so, no one has to do anything they don't want, but if you're comfortable to do so, closing your eyes. Take a breath in. Let it out. And just start to see that singular blade of grass. Just start to sense the environment around it. The sun. Okay, and then the next step would be maybe we're going to think about the structure of that body. That's a different body than our body. So maybe we just bring our feet close together, so that, because blades of grass don't have legs or feet really, so we want to just, if we put our legs together, we might feel a little bit more like the blade of grass. Yeah, they don't have articulated joints like the knees to bend through so much, so we'll have our legs sort of more or less straight for now. And so you're just thinking yourself as one blade of grass, and you're rooting yourself into the earth. So just sense your energy going down, and those roots, because that's part of the blade of grass, is the root system underneath the crust of the earth. Yeah, and the arms are quiet beside us, sort of blending into that body of the blade of grass. And try to sense the sturdiness. I mean, everyone will probably have a different image of their grass, and that's fine. So it's got a certain level of flexibility, and it's also got a certain level of integrity in its structure. So just try and find a little bit of a sense of that, and how it does seek the sunlight, how it does grow towards or lengthen, or we might interpret it as lengthening in our bodies towards the sunlight. And then imagine different kinds of air currents. Imagine that current coming from beyond you, outside of you, a long way from the blade of grass, and slowly it comes and it just impacts, maybe it's the side of the arm or through the middle or down, maybe the current's quite low in the lower legs, and then you're slightly changed, the shape of you changes as the wind or the current pushes against that part of the grass. And maybe another current comes along and takes the grass, bending quietly in another way. Remember to breathe, because often we hold our breath when we're sensing like this. And gently come back to centre. Open your eyes, come back to being a human. That was just a bare taste. It's much better to do it outside, highly recommended, where you have the environment impacting. So we can take another seat back down. I hope that gave some little sense of embodiment research. So going from, it's like being grass in the world. It's not copying, or in a way you're kind of trying to get the structure, but it's not trying to look like a blade of grass. Obviously, we don't look like blades of grass, but more of becoming or a wondering or a curiosity of being grass in the world. So I wanted to ask Kirsten first, has embodiment changed the experience of your work? Like, how's this embodiment practice impacted your work?
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I think this kind of Borders process has impacted my work hugely, actually. When I first joined the Borders project, I joined in the first Moama lab. And I have to sort of admit, I didn't really know very much at all about body weather and didn't really have time to really investigate it before I arrived. But I had thought a lot about embodiment in my job as a museum curator, thinking about how to create spaces in which people in bodies would encounter objects. So I was really interested in this kind of material connections. And at the same time, I had sort of begun developing a walking practice along waterways as a way to investigate waterways, and particularly urban waterways. But I was finding I was getting very frustrated with walking as a mode of inquiry. I felt really trapped by the kind of cultural traditions around walking, the kind of Western ideas about passage and observation and looking for the kind of sublime view that we've all inherited from Wordsworth and other people. And so I was really looking for a way to try and go beyond that, as a mode of inquiry into my relation, particularly with waterways and how to understand them. And so then I just kind of came across this amazing workshop, and I thought, oh, that sounds good, and it's on the river. That makes sense. I can make an argument. And so that really started a process for me through Borders of completely transforming my idea and my engagement with the concept of embodiment to become a kind of trying to kind of think about what that meant physically and kind of sensorially, as well as sort of theoretically, and sort of within enclosed spaces. And it was also a process of not thinking so much about other people's bodies, but thinking more and more about my body in a relationship to the world. That was like a really big shift. So it took me quite a while to understand, I think, sort of just, Linda, what you were describing, sort of what the kind of way in which body weather understands embodiment. And for me, the kind of spark, the kind of aha moment really happened, I think, in Speowa when we were coming back along the Murray, and we'd had this sort of 10 days where I had been fortunate enough to be there for the whole 10 days, and every day we had done a lab which was about trying to be a watery body and to let the weight of the body work. And I was completely exhausted. And then Maggie and I did a little inhabitation of a tree in Speowa. And at the end of that inhabitation, I kind of I was sort of right up into the treetops. And I was quite worried about falling out. And so I was very still. I tried to be very still. And it was amazing because in those moments I spent up there, something quite interesting kind of clicked in my head. And I began to understand, I think, that the idea of body weather and embodiment as thinking about the body as a method, a kind of a tool, a mode for noticing how other beings are in the world, like what is the experience of this particular tree or of trees. And I think the big click for me was thinking it's not just about understanding or trying to connect with their life world, but that when I surrendered myself to that, when I sort of perched in this tree and I was just sort of lying along a trunk, quite upright bough, and had to be very still. So around me there was just this movement of the tree, but I was trying to be very still, mostly for kind of safety reasons. But there was this moment then that I thought like, oh, actually, that's also teaching me a huge amount about what it is for me to be in the world. And indeed, to try and make the leap to say, it's not about me versus the tree or me or the tree. It's actually about trying to hone in on that moment of thinking about us together simultaneously all the time. And so that, started off, I think that kind of really for me then actually sparked a whole process that emerged into sort of making sculptural objects. Because these objects, so the objects I have suspended down in the exhibition downstairs are all made from materials that I picked up on the Echuca Moama floodplain, which are their kind of deposits from the flood. And I found during that whole process, what was interesting is that I would go for these walks and find these objects and want to put them together in a way that was first of all a record of things I was feeling, so concepts of weight, of kind of being held by other beings, of kind of like strained, distant connections, all these kind of like emotional, sensorial, bodily feelings were being expressed through the way in which these objects came together. But they were also simultaneously about the experience, the idea of the flood and what a floodplain is. And so for me, to get back to your question, so I think the whole process for me has really hugely transformed my idea about how to make work, in that it's starting to come from a much sort of deeper space in terms of that's grounded in this idea about how the body, how to kind of imaginatively connect the body up with the rest of the world in a way that can then feed back into the sense of who I am in the world, and that then gets kind of expressed out into these sculptural objects.
Yeah, and I think something about the tree and you being in the tree, Kirsten, you're in a compromised, very not your everyday Kirsten's experience, I'm assuming, of climbing trees all the time. But what it does, so it changes you. When you're sensing in your body and you're in that position, which you're not used to, which is uncomfortable, which is challenging, and then to stop and just be there, then you start to notice the world in a different way because of the position almost, like and the context that you've put yourself into that position. It's very hard to explain to words because it's a lived experience. It changes you. But if you just stood by the tree, you wouldn't have the same impact. It was being in the tree and being in a strange shape and trying to generate material as well. It's very layered.
It's kind of accepting the challenge of the tree as well. That's what
Yes,
I felt. Like I was thinking,
that.
Crap, how do I get how do I do that? And in order to do that, like you use your body, in a way that I don't think I've used in that way for like 40 years.
And you saw the results of amazing tree dancing from the other night if you came to the Friday night performance with Kirsten.
Where I again almost
for
fell
that
off.
research. Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah. And Liz, you had a really interesting journey from your experience of the lab, which you participated in Mildura in 2022, and you've been in and involved in some of the Zoom sessions and but I'm particularly interested in the lab. And what was your initial experience at that lab? Because you didn't know anything about body weather and what you're putting yourself into either.
I had no idea. I'd recently moved to Mildura during COVID lockdown, so I thought it was a good way to engage in the arts community, and I thought I'll just give it a go. I wasn't practicing art at the time, and I had a lot of neurological disorders, which I still have. But the body weather spoke a different language to me. It made me see myself a bit differently within the world and opened up a refreshing sort of... I felt safe in the labs, that I could be whatever, and I was told that I could just do limited movements if that's all I could do. I felt very accepted for whatever I was at that time. I could be who I was, and there was no sort of judgment or anything. So, but there was one particular exercise, I think Peter ran it, where we had to be in a pose, and then we had to then extend ourselves outside the body and imagine bigger than you are. Being outside of the tips of your fingers. And to me that was a aha moment where I started to think outside my own body space and become more aware of the environment and less aware of my problems that I was having neurologically. And I started to paint probably 12 months ago. So, and in the last 12 months I've been able to paint limited, but still painting. But my paintings have changed, and I'm now, it's like an out-of-body experience, and I've bought myself a drone. And so I'm not seeing it as a traditional visual artist would with the landscape. I'm now doing aerial view shots of the environment and being more aware how the lakes are connected to the health of the river. And if we don't look after the lakes, then it affects badly our river. So in the northwest region, there's 1,000 lakes. So I think I have an unlimited
Number of paintings.
areas to go and be in the environment and experience. And I love the sensation of textures, and I've become more tactile now since the lab. And I've gone back to finger painting, which is, you know, not really seen as a thing to do when you oil paint, but I love doing it now. So very tactile. Yeah.
So when you're looking at the aerial shots, or just thinking about the paintings or painting, or in the act of painting, are you? And you said more that you sense more texture in that. Is that something about imagining? Oh, what's the body? What's the earth feel? What does that salt? What's the body of the salt lake?
Yes,
like more inside the.
And I've done a lot of research of what is underneath the crust of a salt lake, and it's just so fascinating. I'm just delving right into it, and there's probably years of me discovering things.
Because I think that's what comes up, isn't it? It's like we're very vision oriented as humans, it seems to me. Not everyone,
I was not a performing arts person at all, so I was well out of my comfort zone doing the body weather, but I gave it a go, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
So,
and it opened up other senses.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Liz. Yeah. And Sandra, similar question. You know, how have the labs and body practice, and Sandra is also a performer as well as an artist, and makes beautiful visual art things as well, but has also got a performance practice as well. So, but it's different than performing in the language that we've been working with in the lab. So I wanted to ask you some things. How would you find it?
I found body weather to be a very enriching experience. Creatively, I was in a desert. I had been involved in Brisbane in improvisation in playback theatre for about 30 years in lots of different ways, offering my services to people's personal stories in a troupe setting. And for various reasons I came home to Bungamberawatha, Albury, and I knew I was seeking something, and I was trying to stay open and network. And I think it's the old story of the teacher appears when the time's ready. And I saw someone told me about body weather, and I just kind of went, this could be it. And so I began my first workshop in Albury Wodonga, and sometimes I find it hard to put my experiences into words, but for me body weather offers a very safe container to go deep and explore. I'll speak for myself, explore my responses to not only to the environment in this particular project setting, but it ended up for me in Euroa, that through the various exercises that activities and the MB, which are non-habitual movements that we make, I just found that a great process for me to enter into my creative space. And then I remember moving around on the floor, and all of a sudden I had a thread of this story that had been just sitting on the back burner inside me for many years. And with Linda's encouragement, I went with it and ended up a long story, lots of different processes and layers. I think artists need to be very robust with what comes up, resilient, and have some courage. And I ended up with the piece that I performed on Friday night, Hidden in Plain Sight. I feel also the process has allowed me to just inhabit my own body more, to feel more comfortable about who I am, just as an everyday person, and also about my heritage, which had been hidden and shushed and shamed for quite a few generations. The whole group of body weather people, I feel kind of like a flock for me, my tribe, and we've been supporting each other, and to me that is a really nurturing experience. I hold a lot of gratitude for being part of this project, and I feel that my personal work, I've gone from being in the desert to kind of like a budding rose in a garden. Yeah.
River red concept.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. Thanks, Sandra. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Kris, you've had a long history. I've known Kris in our processes in Sydney as well for years, many years, in Bellambi, so Body with Bellambi. I think that's where Kris and Ray met as well. So it's been wonderful having Kris wind into this process. So I was wondering, Kris, how's it impacted your work from the labs in a borders context? So, yes, because you've had many different contexts of experiencing maybe body weather in different ways, but in the borders context.
Well, it's Ray, to begin with. Flagged that this thing was gestating, and I'd already had some experience with Frank on the Barker in Wentworth, and had come to do some of my own sort of explorations. But when Rag flagged that this opportunity came up, I was like, oh, okay. And for me, it's really Mildura and sort of the Murray-Darling is I mean, I've grown up playing in its waters and its sands, and like Perry Sandhills and these things. I think from that sense of play as a child, they stay with you. And to be a part, like that opportunity to be a part of that project and to come into place, and particularly Mildura, I knew that I was going to connect with the environment, the landscape, and the people and the communities along. And I've come to every workshop and then gone back. All my holidays have been that I took myself away from my family and just said, I'm doing this for 2 years, I need to do this. And yeah, for me, that experience has enabled a real perspective shift, I think, a real way of honing into landscape and body in a space that, you know, was full of memory for me and full of lots of different types of memories and experiences. But with body weather, there's so many different types of activities and experiments and researches that you can do. And one particular one in Echuca, when we were in that really dry sort of sapling country right next to a big concrete bridge with water just down below that's kind of contained by, you know, put there rocks. Yeah, we're in this space, and Linda gave us this beautiful provocation of, I think it was like about a 15-minute turn. So you take about one rotation, almost like millimetre per second, to turn around. You soften your gaze. You sort of look, you look at your periphery, sort of, and just really soften your focus, and you just very, very, very slowly turn around, and you let things fall into you. You let information fall into you, and it was I've done so much body work, and I'm like, it really hit me in that moment, because the data falling in, I wasn't as frightened as potentially I would have been earlier on, I think, in other experiences of body weather where you might like go, whoa, what? And you just have sensibilities. Your sensibilities just become super sort of switched on, and sensibilities that are from your skin, or, the back of your neck, or internally, or a breath in, or it's sunlight. And particularly for me, there was this moment where I suppose the clouds come over, but I couldn't see the clouds because it was very horizontal, soft gaze, but I felt this pressure, like sort of boom, down like that, and I was like, oh, what a gift to receive this sort of really in there experience, and was like, I can move that. Like that is something that that is like gifted, I suppose. It's a bit daggy word, but you sort of receive this information, and you're like, oh, it's not my ego grabbing at stuff or my eyes grabbing at stuff. It was this sort of and I was like, all I wanted to do was just go, whoa, like it's just you kind of in a response to it. But you've got to hold this space and just keep going, and you've got this task, you've got this border, you've got this parameter to keep going and keep investigating, and then you turn and then somebody would come into view, somebody in red would come into view, and then it's people, they weren't, I suppose, humans. Yes, we're humans, but it was something else. Like it was just like, oh yeah, this interconnectedness between all of this was just really rich. And by the time you finish it, you just kind of come away, and then you kind of got to try and find words to explain it. It's really challenging, that experience. So there's these, I suppose these...
Yeah, there was no order of what we were trying to encourage was not to let the eyes be seduced or to grab onto things. So let's let everything just be what it is and just receive. Also for the hearing and all the other senses. And I have to say I wanted to share that because I was so inspired when Frank gave it to us in COVID lockdown on Zoom in my lounge room. So I was in my room, but I just had to add that because even that had a massive impact, such a big impact that I really wanted to share it. Yeah,
and if
amazing.
I relate that to then my work, so from that point on it was really around finding opportunities to shift perspective. So not looking at the canvas, by lying upside down and sort of sensing into the space and letting things evolve or come out of that. So, and it just gave this really great way of creating new work, I suppose, or just exploring that. And there's lots of opportunities to deepen that. Same with camera, water camera, going in and plonking the camera down in some water space and stepping away and let the camera do the work. And I have no idea what it's looking at. The camera, I've got some curation, but it's just perspective shifting. And yeah, I think that's deepening the connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that? I don't know.
Yeah, so that camera, like the idea of putting the camera in the water and putting it up was somewhat inspired by some of the work you did in the labs and your research, going, if we all look up there or
upside down.
The classic one, I don't know if we did it in this one, but the mirror.
The mirror. Oh.
You can walk through a mirror and just look into the mirror and take a walk through the bush and you just see the sky and the treetops. And it just reverses your whole way. It's a bit like the carbon is coming from here, not from here. There's something that... But you got to do it for a little while.
Yeah.
Give yourself half an hour without... Try not cheat and look at the ground, Just walk slowly, reading the world through the mirror up there. And it shifts the way you receive information. So I think a lot of the body work is trying to do an activity, put constraints around borders, where it's quite handy, constraints, time constraints or mirror or whatever, to shift, to kind of awaken us to receiving information through our senses and not, it's not prioritising a cognition or as a way of knowing. And absolutely, is important, like with Craig giving us information or us explaining an activity or us all discussing our experiences. That's cognition, and we're realising and we're understanding things and processing things. So it's not like discounting cognition, but it's not making it the be and end all, but actually prioritising experiencing through the body. And often, as a few of you have mentioned, it's in stillness. Often, sometimes, it doesn't have to be, but in the stillness, there's an absorption going on, and you start to notice things. So, yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, doesn't really, but it's just some things.
To draw upside down.
But maybe there's some questions from people out here. That would you have any questions that you'd like to ask? I mean, even those have participated. Just quite a few of you. So, yes, Don. I'll just Kris will give you.
It's not a question, but just an observation, I suppose. It's really fascinating hearing all of this, how body weather and this project is very much about honing our senses and becoming more aware of all around us and our body and the environment, and how, you know, just hearing those stories about being at the tree or looking at the sky through the mirror, it's like so much to do with the arts, where we need to give ourselves time to play. And I, you know, as a creative, that's what I'm always hoping to do, to shift the day-to-day drudgery to a side, and you know, the bad I shouldn't say bad habits, but the habits and the way you actually have your life structured to some degree, I suppose. The way you don't look at the sky or the world through a mirror. You don't do that. It's out there in front of you. And anyway, getting to the point that this is what children do. Children have this total openness to everything around them. And we see it through education and just general maturation, I suppose, people growing up, that we seem to lose that. We lose it, or we get it drummed out of us, and the most creative ones out there are the children. They have the most inquisitive minds, and that's what I see as you know, part of body weather is about trying to get back to that childhood inquisitive nature, that total openness to go, what if I just lay here and just looked up there for however long? And I just think about all those things in my memory of being a child where, you know, you might end up on the ground just lying looking at the dirt, you know?
Yeah, watch the ants.
Yeah.
Watch the ants.
All of that sort of stuff. And, you know, another strong memory of mine as a child was lying down looking at the ceiling and imagining that I'm actually, you know, flipped and walking on the ceiling and walking across the bulkheads and through the door upside down, you know. But, you know, that it's just really interesting that this is what we're trying to do, is get back to this childhood innocence and allow us to see the world differently and experience it differently. That was all. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. And thank you. It's true. The curiosity is a big thing, you know.
I have a question for Linda Luke. How has the Borders project affected your body weather practice?
Oh, yeah, no, it's a great question. It's hard to answer off the cuff, but it's been so exciting. And I think I've always been passionate about working in interdisciplinary with people who aren't dancers and performers. I've been really, I want to work with them too. It's like, but I'm just really curious about people and bodies and people being where they are today in their body right now, and everybody's body is perfect just as it is in terms of in relation to doing this kind of work, and so I'm quite passionate about that, and sharing and being curious and working with all the artists and just seeing the responses, and it's taught me a lot, I guess, that to apply some of the principles of that practice that I've been inspired by, and it seems to be impactful for other people, whether it's through art making pragmatically, practically, like making something from you differently than you made it before, or whether it's through just connecting with each other in community through we talked a lot about it being non-social, because there's a lot of, it's just being together, just like musicians play together, there was a lot of feedback from the participants about that, and about it engendering trust and connection and intimacy in ways that we don't often as humans get to be in that relation. So that's been really great. There's heaps of things. I'm still processing all the good things I just want to keep doing more of this the rest of my life. It's great. Any other questions or thoughts or comments or?
I want to respond to Don's comment about...
Yes, please. Yeah.
Ian. Sorry, Ian. I thought you were Ian, and then I thought Linda said Don. I'm totally confused.
My brain. Sorry.
I just want to say thank you so much for bringing that up, because I've over the whole course of this project, I've been trying to think a lot actually about, is there a difference between what we've been doing in the Borders project and what we all did as kids? Just spending an hour looking at some ants. I was a big one for ants. And I think one of the things I really discovered, it was really interesting when the first lab I went to and started doing these crazy movements, and I'm thinking, wow, this is like being a kid, it's great fun. But I think, I really enjoyed actually the kind of rigour that then kind of came into it. I think I've been really thrilled and astonished, but how physically demanding it is, particularly when you don't do it. Probably Linda and Peter going this is soft, but for me it was it's quite challenging, and I think there's something really interesting in that about how that tries to build to say this is about curiosity, but curiosity is kind of the starting point for it. And I think it's then about that sense about how does the encounter with these other beings transform myself? How does and for me that's really interesting, because I think a lot about in this moment of kind of global ecological crisis, and I think that's what's been so powerful working along the river, because it's simultaneously been an encounter with an amazingly beautiful series of places, and also hugely compromised, struggling. We've learned so much from Craig about everywhere you walk, there's kind of evidence of this, that the river is not very well, and that impacts river communities. It's about the whole, it's a real kind of crisis, I think. So there's something in there that's really thinking about what kind of people do we become in order to be able to live in and actually affect change in this particular moment. It's not about pristine nature, it's not about none of those are solutions now. And I think for me, I've thought a lot about actually the way in which the way in which the body weather and that kind of physical engagement contests our histories of language, which is so much based on this separation of self and others, particularly from non-human others. And for me, I think that's just so incredibly powerful. And so I've been thinking now is how do we move from curiosity to engagement, to using the body, to noticing, to understand, empathy with others. How does that then transform into a self of being a person in this moment that can kind of prepare us, enable us to kind of grapple with these huge problems that we're facing. So I just want to say thank you for that, because it's kind of linked into this very kind of complicated thinking that's been going on in my head for quite a while.
Yeah, that was. I'm glad you kind of elaborated on that, because I think play is definitely part of it, and it unlocks certain freedoms in us when we're inside work like that. And like you said, sometimes it's quite restraining. There are a lot of borders around the activities and the parameters, and but within there's a lot of freedom within constraint. As Tessa Quincy, who's a choreographer of Body Weather, would say, there's a whole universe inside a matchbox. So she was a great choreographer that we've worked with a lot, and she would put very tight parameters on our way of making work in order to drill down deeper to find to really extract and distill. So there's where Peter, you know, talking about someone, or was it Craig, but about borders being sometimes, you know, constraints being a good thing, to challenge and be rigorous and find something else. So there is the playfulness, but then there's this insistence to go deeper, which not always feels so playful. And we'll just have a final comment from Kris, and then
I just felt that goes back to Vic as well, and Ray in terms of responsibility, and I think that's the energy next. Is how do we move forward responsibly with this offering that's been given to us, and that's the important thing. And what is that back? What's that? I mean, this is a culmination, but ultimately we go away as individuals and we hold this stuff now, and there's responsibility to continue and be rigorous and, you know, move forward. I think that's important. Yeah. Sorry, you've got one.
It's so true. I feel like we just started, like it was just warming up, but anyway, it was so good. But I hope there's some insights, and I feel like we probably of course for time, and just have a little break before the next one. We will leave it there, but that's cool. And thank you very much. Thank the artists. No, thanking you.